Okay.
Say go.
Yeah, roll.
You got my audio over there? Or do I need to work microphone?
We're good. We're good.
All
We're
right.
just using them, yeah.
So for those of you joining us online, I'm part of an evangelism team here in the New York metropolitan area. The four of us, our contact information's up on the screen over there, so hopefully you can see it, or we'll put the slides up. My contact information, if you want to follow me on Twitter, is Jersey Shore without the vowels, because that's where I'm from. Well, not there. I'm from the real Jersey Shore, for all those people who came and messed it up. So what I figure we'll do today is spend 15, 20 minutes talking about the cloud. What is it? Why?
Happy birthday to you.
Oh, thank you.
Happy birthday, Subway.
Got another month before that happens for me.
Okay. Sorry.
Anyway, so I figured we'll talk about the cloud and Windows Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud offering. What that is, why it's important. It has nothing to do with Joomla. Let's just talk about that in the wider context of things. That might take longer or shorter, I don't know, depending on the questions you guys have about it. And then after that, then we'll switch context to Joomla and talk about how we set up Joomla in Windows and in Windows Azure, and in Windows Azure using Linux, which is something we could do too. You're probably going to be surprised about it. So we're not there yet. We're not going to be there. That's sort of there. Now, when you think of why, this whole being able to have things on demand, these are, some high-level scenarios where cloud computing really is important. And it's this ability to, use what you want, turn it on or off. I only need to use a machine for a couple hours to set something up, run a process, and then I'll just turn it off, and I'll be done with it. The big one, and this is like, from a startup perspective, is you want to start up maybe a new business, a new app, a new site, something, and you don't know how big it's going to grow. It might not grow at all. It might all of a sudden become like the next Facebook and have a gazillion users, and you have to be able to handle that growth very quickly. And the ability to have a service that can just scale up like that, pay for as you go would be another reason. And then the other aspect would be is if you've got a variable load on your site or your service. If whatever you're doing has peak traffic times. Maybe you're running an e-commerce site and it's going to be really peak business in November and December every year for the holiday season. Or maybe you're running a site that handles orders for a restaurant and you're going to have predictable peaks at lunch and dinner every day when people buy their food. Well, if you know that, let's say you have provide the infrastructure and pay for that to own those servers to handle that peak load, even though most of the time you might be below peak. When you think of like a restaurant, or like let's say, pizza restaurant, they have a peak lunch and dinner, and maybe if it's US wide, the peak lunch and dinner is rolling based on the time zones across the country. But then halftime on Super Bowl Sunday in early February, that's like the monster peak. It's probably bigger than any other peak, and it happens at the same time across the whole country because halftime is everywhere. You're going to buy and run all those servers to handle that peak load all year? Probably not. So a cloud scenario is great because you can just run things low, and then when you need it, just flip the switch for whatever your peak load is and turn it off. So these are really high levels of where cloud computing is beneficial in terms of scale and just general stuff. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. Where it doesn't make sense, and in the context, I'll bring us back to Joomla a little bit, is you're just running a personal blog or some personal website or maybe a business card type site that has very low traffic. Probably not really best fit for the cloud because it's like taking a sledgehammer to a needle. It's not it'd be overkill. You can certainly do that, but think about that in the context. So you might look at some of this stuff and depending on what you're doing with Joomla and say, oh well, we're just running a simple CMS. It's not high load. We don't need this stuff. It is overkill. But I'm sure there are plenty of Joomla sites out there that are pretty high load with a lot of traffic that could benefit from resiliency and all the other stuff that's going to come along with it. So what's Windows Azure in that context? So that's Microsoft's cloud service offering. And it's really broad. It's really wide. It has a lot of different services. But to sum it up simply, at two levels, it's a place where you can run your application. So think of it, in high-level context, it's another hosting option. It's a place you can run your app in our data centers. but it's much more than just hosting because of the nature of what goes on behind the scenes and how it's managed. Or it's a place you can store your data. And I say or being the keyword there because you can consume and store data and purchase data services from Azure independently of actually running your application. So you could be running Joomla on your own server and then say, you know what, I want to take all my images and my video and multimedia files and store them in Azure and take advantage of some of the streaming services. So if I want to stream to my users, I can stream off of Azure servers which are around the world, like the content delivery network, without hosting the actual site there. Or of course you could do both together. You could have everything running up there in the cloud. But like I said, it's a lot more beyond just hosting. There's a lot of other features that when you have to build a large site that scales up with huge amounts of traffic, that there are all these other services and things you have to configure and set up. And when you go into cloud, these things just become a tick in the box. You can go in the control panel and say, I need to order up, I need this service, I need this extra feature. So if I want a content delivery network to take all my media and cache it on 20-something servers around the world so that when folks are coming in over low bandwidth to download an image from my site, they get it from a local server versus from halfway around the world. We've got things like distributed caching. So you cache your site in memory across a large bank of memory servers. Speed up performance that way depending on high load. Identity management is a big thing that we offer. Now, when you go into a Joomla site, you can get this concept of logging into the site, right? But a lot of times these days now, someone visits your site, whatever it might be for, and the first thing you ask them is, can you create a login account? And you're like, another name, another password I have to remember? Popular thing now is just log in with something I already know. Let me log in with Facebook. Let me log in with Google. Let me log in with my Microsoft account. So in Azure, we've got identity solutions that basically let you federate across different identity providers, including internal within a company. So Active Directory is really big in the Microsoft world. They've had folks log into their domain computers in a lot of big businesses. You could let folks come at your site and then choose what they log in with. And you don't have to worry about it. It would just map the person's Google ID back to whatever the actual Joomla account is that user data covers. And Azure will handle a lot of that plumbing work for you between the different identity providers. And these are the types of things that are just there. They're just available. They become services you turn on. You don't have to go, have someone sit there and configure a server and figure out how to set it. Just they're there. So that's what makes it easy and nice to use. Now, getting beyond that, the big thing with cloud computing with Azure, and if you look at Microsoft's competitors, in the space, which would be like Amazon and Google and VMware and things like that, is that all the stuff we're doing is highly reliable and highly available. So these systems are designed for failure. So if you're running an app, we guarantee you a service level agreement of 3 nines uptime, which means your site should never go down, or very rarely if it does for a short period of time. I already talked about pay only for what you use. But let's talk about where. So in the context of Azure, where would we be running it? So we have Microsoft data centers around the world. There's 8 of them. There's 4 in the US, 2 in Europe, 2 in Asia. You'll see in the US I got 2 there have green dots versus the others have yellow. We originally started off with the 6 yellow ones, and we added these 2 extra data centers in the US back in the spring for more capacity. But in the US, the data centers were in Chicago and San Antonio. We were in Dublin, Ireland, and Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and then Hong Kong and Singapore over in Asia. And that was pretty much the way we identified where these things were. When 2 new ones came online, these were called US East and US West, but they never said where they were. They just let us assume somewhere east and west of the Mississippi River. And the reason for that is sort of security through obscurity, I guess, in a degree. So the data centers are secure facilities. This is a picture of a data center outside of the Chicago area somewhere. And they're locked down. And if you did somehow get clever and you went on like Google Maps and figured out where they were and you showed up, there's physical security on site. We've got rooftop snipers up there watching over the building. We don't have sharks with lasers yet. So if if you broke through those two guys, then you might get into the data center. This is a picture of what the inside of one of the data centers looks like. And you might be thinking, okay, where are the servers? That looks like something I'd see like by the port on the side of the New Jersey Turnpike over by Newark Airport. One of the things that makes cloud computing really feasible, not just for Microsoft, for everyone, is the availability of cheap commodity hardware, relatively cheap commodity hardware. And we have these servers that are custom built from manufacturers, and they're shipped in these shipping containers. So these containers are filled with racks of servers, and they're all modular. They just drop them on the floor, they plug in the power, they plug in the network, and they come alive, and the data center becomes aware of all the machines and can control them. These are actually some of the older ones. Some of the newer ones are standalone. They can actually be outside. They don't need to be in a building. They use natural air for cooling, things like that. But if we go inside one of these actual containers, we'll see racks and racks of servers, about 1,500 to 2,000 servers in one of these containers. And like I said, they're commodity hardware. I think the specs are published, but I think they're 8-core machines. I don't remember the size of the RAM and the hard drives and all that stuff. But they're designed for redundancy in here. So if a hard drive fails, inside this thing, there's no bells and whistles or a guy in a lab white lab coat that comes running in to service the hard drive. The system just marks the hard drive as gone, recovers the data from another place because everything's triple redundant across 3 pieces of hardware, and restores it wherever and just notes that's gone. It's not until a certain level of hardware fails that an alert goes off and a human will go in and service the equipment. If you think about the hard drive on your actual computer, it's like you get a bad sector. The operating system just marks it as a bad sector, doesn't write to it, and moves on. And if enough sectors go bad, then the hard drive crashes, and then you got to get your hard drive serviced. It's sort of the same scenario here when you think about it at that large scale. So data is always triple redundant across 3 physical pieces of hardware, but that's for storage. If you think in terms of running stuff, everything that's going to be running is going to run in a virtual machine of some sort. And virtual machines are backed up via storage at some point. So if a motherboard or an actual machine goes down and you lose the virtual machine, Windows Azure, the service as a whole, will say, okay, I know where the truth is. I know where this source for this virtual machine is, the image of it, and I will immediately get another virtual machine spun up running your application, your code, as fast as I can crank that up. And that's how the system just keeps on moving. At a high level between data, if one drive goes bad, it restores data from wherever the other 2 backups are. Your virtual machine is restored from wherever the master image is, or your application is stored. Any questions or thoughts about that? Pretty high level stuff there. So inside there's lots of servers, and the servers are running virtual machines. And up through June, they were running Windows Server, and now we also have the ability to run Linux inside these virtual machines, which is a new feature we added in June of this year, which was a pretty surprise announcement. A lot of folks didn't expect that from Microsoft. But that's where your application runs. So when you run your application, you get to say how many virtual machines you want your application to run on. Do you want to run on 1, 2, or 100 based on what you're doing? And the basic premise is it's an hourly charge per virtual machine instance. So if you want it running on 2, it's 2 times whatever it is per virtual machine. The virtual machines come in different shapes and sizes. So it's like extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, kind of like you're ordering a drink at McDonald's. Except here in Europe, you can't get the extra large anymore. And so the price varies based on, so it's the amount of RAM, the amount of cores. So the smallest one is a shared single core CPU, then you get a single dedicated CPU, so on and so forth. Up to buying the largest one would be a full 8-core CPU, depending on what your needs are. They have different amounts of bandwidth associated with it. When you think about costs, typically costs in the cloud are based on an hourly charge for the compute time for running a virtual machine and bandwidth. you pay for bandwidth out of the data center. So any data that leaves the data center, you get charged for that. And I believe it's about 12 cents a gigabyte for data going out of the data center. You don't pay for data going in. And then you also pay for storage. So storage has a cost. So the amount of storage you take up on the disk space, you pay. And I believe that starts at 8 cents a gigabyte per month for storage. So all these numbers have nickels and dimes, but they add up to real numbers. And there's a pricing calculator on the Azure site where you can drag out the sliders, estimate your usage based on what you know you're going to be using, and you can figure out how much it's going to cost from that level. Now that's how Azure started, where it was really discrete. You know, you'd say, I'm going to upload my application, run it across X number of virtual machines, and set it off to the races and go with it.
I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned it also handles like CDN.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a virtual machine sitting somewhere in Chicago, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and we want CDN, is there extra virtual machines in order to implement the CDN?
Sort of, but not really. So that's a good question.
Okay.
So let's say you put your application on a server in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
all right, and your data would be in Chicago too, because you want your data co-located with your app.
Right.
And you put on the CDN, the content delivery network, it's essentially a cache of your data, your static data. So your site would always be served out of Chicago, but your images would be cached out on servers around the world. So let's say a user comes to your site from Paris, France,
Mm-hmm.
right? The first time they're going to go to Chicago to get the HTML, but now you've got some big 300K image file, right? The first time the first person goes through, the server in Paris said, I don't have this, so they'll go to Chicago, get the image, cache it locally in Chicago. I mean, in Paris, and then every time every other user comes back from Paris, they're going to get that 300K image from the Paris server, which will speed it up, especially when you're
Right.
mobile and all that kind of stuff. So
Okay.
that's how that works.
I was thinking about the cost-wise too. I mean, is there extra cost for the CDN, or is
Yeah.
it just part of the whole package? Or
All those features have their little
sure.
nickel and dime charges, literally. I mean, small.
That
Well,
adds
actually,
up.
I should say penny charges, like fractions of pennies and stuff.
But it adds up when a real, sure.
It
high
does,
volume.
yeah. I mean, but it's not ridiculous, but it also depends on the load. I mean, if you're doing a load where you really are dependent on a CDN, like that's going to be beneficial to your users, yeah, you're probably going to pay more because you're at that whole level of, my site's really big, I got that problem.
Okay, I'll resume questions later now.
Okay. Azure, it's a Microsoft thing. It's all about .NET programming and apps and stuff like that. And it's not. You can run anything there. You can run PHP, which obviously allows Joomla, Java. We support Node. We recently added Python. And up until June, the answer here was if it runs in Windows, because these are just Windows Server virtual machines, it'll work here. And there were some caveats to that because when Windows Azure was founded, it was started as a platform as a service offering. And so I'm going to have to explain what that means in a second. But these virtual machines, our notion was, look, we don't want you to worry about managing infrastructure. We don't want you to worry about managing servers. Just write your code for your application and then give us your code. Upload your code to us and we'll run it across our virtual machines. Which implies some sort of a trade-off. You're going to have a little bit less control or visibility as to what these VMs do under the covers, but you just, hey, I don't care about it. Here's my code, just run it. And therefore, sometimes you'd have to make sure your application played within the boundaries of what these VMs could and couldn't do. And the major thing that we had was these VMs were stateless by design. So you wouldn't write to the hard drive of these individual virtual machines. You put your storage external, whether it be in a database or through other part of Azure we offer storage services, like Amazon has S3, with these things called blobs and tables, which is like a file store system. That's the triple redundant, but it's a separate thing. It's not the file system of the hard drive of the virtual machine you're on. Because if one of these VMs did die, we just go get another one off the shelf, slot it in, and load your application code into it. Your data has to be external. So if this guy dies, where would your data go? It would get lost. And that caused a problem with Joomla. It made it very tricky to run Joomla here. You could do it, but required, you know, a bit of a custom configuration on Joomla. You had to jump through a bunch of hoops. And up through this past June, I probably wouldn't recommend you run Joomla up there. I mean, unless you were really serious about this type of stuff. That's all changed. They announced some major new features to Azure and expanded what it does in June this year. And now as a result of that, you actually have two options for running Joomla in Windows Azure, and they're really, really good, really easy to do. So in cloud computing, there are these three generic terms that people talk about in the industry: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And that's kind of like the blue blocks, kind of what they symbolize. I said Azure started off as platform as a service. In other words, just build your app, build your code. Don't worry about the operating system or anything or what you're running. Just and give us your code. You know, you send it to us in a zip file, and that zip file will basically be the truth. You know, compile your code, get it out of your source control repository, and we'll throw it in a VM. If the VM crashes, we go back to your zip file, load up a VM, slap your zip file with your code, and off to the races. Amazon, if anyone here familiar with that, what Amazon does? Amazon Web Services. So Amazon would be the biggest competitor to Microsoft. They do mostly infrastructure as a service. And in that realm, it's the same thing. They're basically providing virtual machines, you know, by the hour. They charge for them, pay for data and bandwidth the same way we do in Azure. But the unit of deployment is a virtual machine. You have to build and configure the virtual machine, the server. You configure it with all the software you want, and you tell them, here's a snapshot of my virtual machine. Now run one of these or run 100 of these things. And of course, they deal with load balancing and networking and all that stuff. But there's a lot more responsibility and a lot more control over what's going on because you own the virtual machine. They just snapshot it for you and then spin up copies. If one fails, they load another one in place. It's more of a lower level thing. Software as a service on the opposite end of the spectrum is more like any website is software as a service. It's just software you consume. You don't know how it's implemented, how it works. It's just, you know, I pay a subscription for it. Maybe it's free, ad supported, and I just use it. As developers, or, you know, if we're hosting a site, we'll probably be building one of these two to provide that to our end user. That's the thing that we're giving to our end user. If you think of it, Joomla can be treated as software as a service because once you have it running, the end user really is consuming it and managing it through the back-end console. You know, Joomla just publishing things to it. It's just a service at that point. So that's what we want to provide. So let me skip these slides here and go to this. So when Azure started out, we had these cloud services. These are three choices you have in Azure for hosting an application. When we started out as platform as a service, cloud services was what I described. These virtual machines, you upload a zip file with your application code and you just slot it in. Now we've expanded where we have virtual machines. This is very similar to Amazon, where basically you can create a virtual machine, configure it the way you want, and then we deploy 1 or 100 of them. And this is where you can use Linux. So you can set up a Linux VM, configure it with Joomla however you want, you know, using all the tools you're used to using. You SSH into the box, you deploy and manage the way you want to, and then you tell us how many to run. You know, this is a full stack. That works great now. On the opposite end of the scale over here, we have this new thing called websites, and that's what I'm going to focus on demoing today. And that takes this notion of, where here in the middle I said, hey, take your app code, upload a zip file, and just let it run, and makes that easier, and then also lets Joomla run. So with the cloud services, you would upload a zip file with your application and tell us run it in 1 or X virtual machines. Those are dedicated virtual machines. So when you say I want to run it in 2, in the Azure Manager portal, Windows Azure would actually say, all right, we're going to go get 2 virtual machines, boot them up from the disk, install your zip file, and it's a dedicated VM. You're not competing with any other applications used in the box. But there is like a wait time. It takes whatever, 5-6 minutes to boot up a server and then put a zip file, and you'd have to wait for that to happen anytime you want to do a deployment or update your code. Well, what they did over here with websites, this is a shared solution. And it's a lower tier. It starts off free. It's actually a free tier. You don't have to pay for it to get started. And the concept there is that we run a bank of virtual machines that are always live, that are shared. And it's still the same concept. You upload your application code into it, but it's a live VM already running. So your app is automatically, instantly running. There's no 5-6 minute wait time for the deployment. And you use the tools you're used to using, whether you want FTP it up or deploy from Git, source control, that type of stuff. But it is a shared hosting solution. So your app is on a virtual machine, well, multiple virtual machines, but virtual machines that are shared with other apps. And behind the scenes, as the traffic grows to your site, Azure is actually scaling your app across multiple virtual machines. So if you upload it and you start getting a lot of traffic, your app will actually probably be sitting on 2, 3, or 4 virtual machines on the back end with other apps, and Azure just auto adds or decreases based on what it needs for your usage. So it's more seamless that way. And with the tooling for Joomla, it's just file a new Joomla site and it just shows up and it's there. So that's pretty cool. And within this model over here, that starts off free. You can pay and say, I want to have a dedicated virtual machine that runs just my site, no one else's site, and then you pay for that. But it's the same concept. You're uploading to a live VM, so you don't have to have this deployment time, and everything works really easily there. Questions, thoughts?
And if I spin up a virtual machine on a Joomla, if I get a Joomla site, a website, will it be on IIS? Can I get it on IIS with SQL Server? Or?
So over here,
yeah.
This is IIS. This is using IIS under the covers. That's how we've implemented it. And here,
SQL Server is the database.
In here, this was going to be SQL Server, well, SQL Azure, which is our Azure variant of SQL. This was on IIS. This is based on IIS with SQL Server or MySQL. And the way they've been able to do this, they use this under the covers to do MySQL. But yeah, this does MySQL, which to me I think is the safest choice for Joomla, because that's just the way things have been done. It works with SQL Server now, but I don't think a lot of folks in the Joomla community are familiar with SQL Server, so if you run into any issues, post something in a forum, it might be harder to get a response. Whereas if you have an issue with MySQL, everyone knows the answer to that. So using this, which is IIS with MySQL, is the default easy way, which I would go. If you go over here, this is just running it the same as you'd run it any other host. And in fact, if you put in here, this is an exclusive Azure. You could take that VM and just pick it up and take it away from Azure and put it in Amazon. It's just that it's your own VM.
Yeah. I'm actually thinking that there might be some corner cases where it's very useful to talk to SQL Server because there's already something there you want, but I haven't really thought it through about how I would get. Yeah, I realize, if you're talking about all these extensions that if they're not calling standard calls to Joomla, they'll break if they're on SQL Server instead of MySQL, and that over time may get better as more people run it. But
yeah,
there might be some advantages to be able to run on SQL Server if you have a lot of data that's on SQL Server somewhere else. It might be a very elegant way to approach it.
So Joomla with SQL Server has been about a year now. Basically, it was 2.5. When Joomla 2.5 came out, that's when they had support for SQL Server. But that's for the core Joomla. Like a lot of the extensions and the modules, the developers are hard tied to MySQL. They haven't tested, so that's where you get some wonkiness.
Right.
But yeah, it is possible. If you really want to do that because you have a need, then you can go down that path, and it's supported now. But in the community, I just don't think the knowledge base is there where it needs to be.
Right.
So let's jump out here in the slides, because those are the 3 high-level things I wanted to just show you. Now, skip down here to So this is where I sort of go back to the talk I've done before, previous, one of the Joomla user groups and even last year here, which is just Joomla on Windows. All right. So Joomla on Windows, forget the cloud, is pretty easy. This site here, Microsoft.com/web/Joomla, brings you to this site, which is everything Joomla on Windows. And what it essentially is going to direct you towards is using Joomla with this free tool that we have called Web Matrix. So it's a free tool that lets you set up, build, and manage websites locally on your PC. And that runs on Windows XP, Vista 7, and I'm using it on Windows 8 today. So it runs everywhere for that type of thing. And what it does is it sort of, under the cover, calls into this installation package engine we have called the Web Platform Installer. Like if you were deploying Joomla on Linux, you have like a LAMP installer or something like that that just puts in Apache MySQL. So the Web Platform Installer is sort of the equivalent on the Windows platform. It gets everything configured and set up with MySQL or SQL Server and using IIS, not Apache, on Windows with Joomla. And it pulls, and PHP, because that's the setup PHP too. But it pulls all the source files, not from Microsoft servers or Microsoft forked versions. It's actually pulling it from the Joomla site, from the php.net site. Just going out and pulling the latest versions of all the dependencies and lies it down for you. So it's really handy like that. When you install Joomla on Windows and you use Web Matrix creates an isolated instance of your site using something called IIS Express. IIS is the web server on Windows. IIS Express is an isolated version that you can run where the developer doesn't have to be an administrator on their laptop, which is a problem in a lot of companies. Because if you want to run with IIS, you have to be an admin on your box. You can do that. There's ways to do that, but when you run with IIS Express, it's the full IIS, but it just runs in the context of that user locally, and you bang on it from a development perspective, and then publish. It's got a really nice hook to publish things up to a server, whether it be Linux or Windows. And what I'm going to show you today is that we just updated this to Web Matrix 2 about 3 weeks ago. So Web Matrix has been out for just under 2 years. Web Matrix 2 has been in beta for about 6 to 8 months, and like I said, it was finally released about 3-4 weeks ago. So it really makes it easy to just download, install Joomla, get it running locally, and then push it back out to wherever you want to publish to. What they added new in Web Matrix 2 is the ability to publish directly into Windows Azure in the cloud using the website stuff that I talked about. So that's really nice. So that is done on the PC, and I'll walk through that. But also what we can now do in the cloud is I don't even need to have a PC. I can even do this from a Mac or from wherever. I can just, in my browser, go into Windows Azure, create an Azure account, and just say I want a new Joomla site in Azure. I can just pick it from a catalog of other apps, and literally it'll just install it up in Azure for me. And then that site is accessible, and I can go in and be off to the running without even having anything locally on my machine, which is nice. Once it happens, I can then use that Web Matrix tool to connect to that instance of Joomla, pull it locally, pull a local copy, make my edits, and then push it back up when I'm done. So it's a really good experience for that. So I figured that's what we'll go through. You guys have any questions before I do that?
So you can, this is platform independent, right? Because it's browser based. It doesn't matter whether it's PC or Mac.
What do you mean?
No, that's not true.
No?
What's
This
what kind
Web
of-
Matrix 2 that you're talking
Oh,
about
Web Matrix is a tool that runs on Windows.
runs
It's a client. It's like think of it like a mini IDE.
well, it runs on Windows on a server, but not on your local machine.
No, Web Matrix runs locally on your machine.
Oh, it does?
That's a local. It's like a local IDE, like a developer tool. Although it's not really a developer tool. It's like a site manager tool. Probably is probably a better way to describe it. You can do some basic script editing. There's color, syntax highlighting if you want to add
So
JavaScript.
what is it XAMPP type thing? Or it's an environment that you can run Joomla.
Sort of, yeah. Well, it's a tool. It's not, you don't run Joomla runs on Windows and IIS, but the tool is just for you to manage. You'll see it when I
Okay.
come it up. when you set up in Azure, that you just do through the browser. You're just saying, hey, I want to log into Azure and create a Joomla site that's running in the cloud.
Right.
And I don't even need anything on my machine for that.
But you were saying that you can then download it locally.
Yeah, if you're using Web Matrix on when you have a Windows box, you can sync that site locally and work on it and push it back up. If you're on a Mac, you can use whatever tools you would use on your Mac because it's just like another host. You can just pull that site and update it from your Mac using the tools you normally use, FTP or Git or whatever you want to use. That would work the tools you normally use, if that makes sense. So this is windowsazure.com, one word, and this is where you go and you can learn all about the platform, and it's big and it would take you a while to go through it. But when you come here, you can sign up for a free trial account, and they have 90-day trials for when you're using the dedicated virtual machines, where you get a free allotment of virtual machines that you can use for 90 days. But for the websites, which I'm going to show you today, when you sign up for that, you can have 10 free websites running indefinitely, but with very small bandwidth allocation. So like if you put up a site, it's free, but if it gets slammed and gets a lot of traffic, you hit your bandwidth level and then it'd be cut off or disabled until you decide to switch to a paid version. So, for development, for playing around, testing, or just you're the only person hitting the site, great solution to get started. And then, later on, you decide where you want to go from there based on what you're doing. So I'm logged into the portal. This is a different tab. I've logged into the portal. And I have a lot of services running in my personal account. You can see this long list. If the first time you log in, you probably have nothing here. This would be a blank, empty list with no services running. And on the left side, looks like I'm getting cut off a little bit, but this is a list of all the high-level services. So I have virtual machines, I have websites, cloud services, databases, storage, settings. There's websites there. They're all listed, and I can jump into any of them. And in the portal, so there's a big new button down here, and it's using a lot of the Windows 8 design metaphors. So if I come in here, I actually have 2 websites that my teammates are running there. I click on websites. But if I want to do a new Joomla site in the cloud, I can just come here and at the bottom say new. This wizard pops up, so I want to say new. There's compute, which means I want to host an app or run an app. Data, if I want to set up a database or something like that, and then some of the other services. Now for compute, I've got these 3 options: the website, the virtual machine, and cloud service. Mobile service is a new thing we did. It's like a package, so you can set up a website or service that supports, if you have a mobile client app, whether it's iOS, Android, or Windows Phone. I'm not going to do that today. But for website, come over and just create a blank website, and it'll basically reserve a URL and give me account credentials. And then after that, I got a blank website. I can just use FTP or whatever and push code up to it. Drop whatever I want up there. Or I can create one with a database. So maybe I want a SQL Server or a MySQL database. I can do that. Or I can choose from the gallery. And the gallery is where you get this list of applications that are up there. So I can, there's CMSs, there's blogs, there's other tools. So I can just come down this list and choose Joomla. And now it's going to ask me for some settings here. So the first thing it wants to do is ask me for
I hate this Windows 8 interface. Maybe I haven't learned it yet.
No, I was looking for an app that I don't have installed. So just zooming in on the screen here. So you notice here, when you create a website in Azure, or anything in Azure, you have to pick a unique URL that's going to be on the internet. And it's going to be a subdomain off of azurewebsites.net, if it's a website. If it's one of our VMs, it'll be cloudapp.net. And that's going to be your unique URL on the internet. After you've created your site or your account, you later can map CNAMEs and domains, so you have mydomain.com, so your users would never know where you're located. But when you initially set up, you have to pick a unique name that's going to run on the internet there. So I'm just going to go in here and I'll call this JDay NYC. demo. And now I can choose a database. I actually have some SQL databases already allocated, or I can create a new MySQL database or a new SQL database. I would do new MySQL.
So you would just put that CNAME in your, let's say you have a low traffic site and GoDaddy is your DNS, you would just put a CNAME in there?
Yep. After you go through the initial wizard creating the site, then you come back into the management console and yeah, you do that. Now, when you set up a website, I don't want to get cut off. There we go, look there. When you set up a website free, you can't do the CNAME. You have to step up to the paid, and the minimum version for that is, I think, $9 a month. And then you can put the CNAME in to do that. So I just got to choose my subscription, which is my account. I actually have 2 accounts, and I just have to pick which one. You choose which data center, and right now the websites feature is only running in East or the West US data center. I'm just choose West. And when I scroll down here, now I get some of the Joomla settings. So, Joomla wants to know if I want to load sample data. So I'm going to say yes, you can see that, and I'll just call this Joomla Day NYC. Site administrator admin, I can create the password for this. So the password for the Joomla site. And now, it wants to create up a new MySQL database, and it asks me to pick which data center it's in. And I actually get 4 choices for that. But you want to co-locate your data with your site. It gives me a weird name. I could change it, but I'll just keep it. And MySQL is provided by a partnership Microsoft has with ClearDB. So there's a little fine print here basically that we agree to ClearDB's terms of use or whatever. Hit check and then it should go off to the races. So now it's actually going out right here. It says creating, and this will take 2-3 minutes for it to set up. And it's actually spinning up it's actually pulling all the Joomla binaries, the PHP binaries, dropping it onto this live virtual machine, and it will come live at that URL that we set up, and then anyone in this room can hit it from your machine too. So there it is, now it's running. And if I click into it, I think I did JDay NYC demo. There we go. JDay NYC demo. So now here we go. That should hit the Joomla homepage. Did before. Maybe it's still setting up in the back end. But once you're in, this is in the portal. This is the dashboard of what your site's doing. And down here, these are like sliders and levers. You can see the usage, what the data usage is, what the CPU usage is, what the traffic is. So you can monitor the site. On the right side, you get your FTP credentials, like the URL where you would FTP files up to the site and connect to it. You can set up Git publishing. So if you want to deploy, if you keep your Joomla site in a Git repository, you can push it up that way and get at things. If you click over to the Scale tab, this is where you can switch from a free account to a shared account, and then you can slide up how many dedicated VMs you want to run your site up here. going on. I can see I'm linked to a MySQL database there. And I'll go back to the monitoring point. Let's see.
You know, Peter, what might be good for you guys is if you had sort of a scale right there that said, you know, we recommend maybe based on traffic or what you see coming in, you know, to move up or serve as a marketing thing. To say, you know, looks like you need to increase your machines or decrease or.
We don't, well, for this one, we don't,
Recommend.
for the websites, it's sort of handled for you. Because we are adding more machines. It's what you're switching to is if you want dedicated machines that are not sharing resources. That's what you're switching to here. But if you're saying multi-tenant, we'll put it on multiple machines to handle the load. And then you're paying for the bandwidth at that point.
But that's after you move off the free.
Yeah, after you move up the free, then you're saying how many.
Yeah, because somebody may be on the free and they're starting to get a lot of traffic, even though, you know, they just set it up to develop or just to see what happens to it. Might not be a bad idea to say, it's like you're ready
Yeah.
to increase services.
I'm frustrated why this isn't coming. It looks like it's set up a blank site, not the actual Joomla site. That should be there. So let me switch gears. Assume that's up there, and go to the Web Matrix tool. So this is Web Matrix 2. This is an app that's running locally on Windows. You get this from that site, which is microsoft.com/web/Joomla. And when you come to Web Matrix 2, you can open an existing site that's on your hard drive. You can connect to a remote website. So I could connect to this website that I just set up in Azure and then download it locally and pull all the files over for me, and I can edit it and do what I want. Or I can create a new site locally. So I'm gonna start the process of creating a new site locally. So this is separate, independent from the cloud. So here I can, there's the same thing as a gallery of sites. I want a Joomla 2.5 site, and I'm gonna call this Joomla NY local. And that's the site name. Say next. I can choose whether I want SQL Server or MySQL. I'm going to stick with MySQL. I already have a password set for the root from the previous instance. And now what it shows me here is the EULA for Joomla. And it says total download size is 7 megs, direct download link. And if I look at that, it might be hard for you guys to see. But that little tooltip is actually coming off of joomlacode.org. So it's pulling directly from Joomla. It's not Microsoft Fabric or anything. And I already have PHP installed on this machine in MySQL, but if I didn't, I would then see this would be like a scrolling list of all the dependencies. It would say, oh, you need PHP 5.3, oh, you need MySQL. And you would just say next, and it would just pull it all in one place. So we can hit I accept here. It asks for the sample data. We'll say, yeah, I'll and now it's going to install Joomla locally on the machine. And then after that opens, the site will be open and running in the matrix there. So this thing here. All right, so now it finished, Web Matrix finished installing it locally on the machine. A lot of screen real estate there. Now I'm going to step back. So it put in here all of the database name and site admin password. It just randomly assigned those. So I could go log in and change those afterwards. So copy those to the clipboard, and I'll go in the notepad and I'll paste those down just so I have those around. I'm going to get the site admin password in a second to log in. And if I hit OK here, it popped open a new tab in the browser. So this is running the Joomla site locally that I just installed on my Windows machine here. And if I switch back to the Web Matrix tool, here's the Web Matrix tool. So if you haven't seen this before, you know, it pulls in some nice little new links here to the Joomla forums and community and stuff. It shows me where it's running on the local host off of a random port in IIS. It shows me where it installed those files locally. So by default, it puts in the user's documents folder, my websites, and the name of the site. It's where it drops all the files. And now I can start browsing different things here. So I can have a request tool. So this is like a tracer that's showing me all the hits I'm making on the site when I request from the browser. I can go and change some of the settings here. You know, the default pages are. I can browse to the files. So I can see all the files that make up the Joomla site here on the left, and you know, I can open these things up, like index.php, and I can edit it if I wanted to. You know, do that type of setting. For databases, I can come in and here, and then there's the MySQL database that's running the Joomla site. And you know, I can click open and I can browse the data. So here's the content that's actually in the content table. And I can make edits here. I can create a new table. I can manage this database. You know, pretty basic, good editing I can do here in the database.
What tool is this?
This is the Web Matrix tool.
The Web Matrix tool.
Yeah. And then there's this other tab called Reports. And one of the things that Web Matrix has built in is an SEO tool, SEO optimization tool. And it will basically launch a crawler against your website locally while you're developing it. Or you can put that a live website that's running on the internet and tell how many levels to spider. And it will look for things that are search engine optimizations that you should do. So if I say create a report, it'll kick it off, but it takes like 5-10 minutes to run. I have a report from the demo I was working on yesterday. I just ran this against the default Joomla install, no changes. And here's the report that came up. And you can see there's like a list of things here. But I'll click on this one here. It says the image tag does not have an alt attribute defined. So you think about it, if you don't have an alt attribute, which is the text that tells what the image is, the search engines can't read what an image is. So that's considered bad practice. It's not critical, but if you want your site to get indexed, you should do that. So here, when I expand that, it shows me all of the instances of where that happens in my app. And then if I click on it, it actually gives me the details of the message, where it happens, and then why. It explains this down here, and it gives recommendations as to what I should do to fix it. So it's a really nice tool to just run against an existing site. You can just use it for that to help get you some more optimization there. So that's another thing built into it. Now, back out here at the main level, they put direct links here so I can click the site admin, and it brings me right to the Joomla login console. So I can do admin, and let's paste in that path that I stuck in the So I can log in, and there's the back end, and this works the way you'd expect it to work. So I'm just running this all locally here. Now let's say I want to go into content. Just like this. I'll put it in the parks block instead of that. Select user, let's just select me as the admin. And just be able to save that. Close. And if I come back out here, go to sample sites, and click on Art Logs, there's that post editor, right? So that's all locally here on the machine. Now, in the Web Matrix tool, if I want to publish this site that I just set up, I created, did my customizations, did whatever I did locally, click the publish button, and I get this dialog here. Now forget the cloud. If I just want to publish to my existing server, I can come here and via FTP put in the credentials to hit my Linux server or whatever I want to do. Or if I'm deploying to Windows, Windows uses this Windows can use FTP, but Windows also has this technology called Web Deploy, which will package up a website to push it into IIS. So Web Deploy would be the best way to do it. Fill it out with the credentials for my server, and put in a connection string for my SQL database, and it'll push the whole thing up to the server, updates and all, and then it will be live on the internet that way. What I can also do is I could publish to Azure. So to publish something to Windows Azure, you have to authenticate this web matrix tool so it has permissions to hit your Azure account. So Azure, when you go to the Azure Management Portal on the web, generates this thing called a publisher profile, and it's basically an XML file that has your credentials and a management certificate. So you would go to Azure, create this little XML file, download it locally, and then you browse to it here at Web Matrix to link up your account. So what I need to do is go back into Azure. Since that site didn't seem to do what I wanted it to do, it's still there. I can download the publish profile. I'm going to just drop that in the download folder. Go back to Web Matrix. Import that file. And now it pre-populates all the fields with the things I need to connect to that site I created in the cloud. So there's the server it's located at, the username, the site name, the URL where it's going to be, and the connection string to the database in the cloud. And what it's going to do now is take my code locally and push it up there. So I'm just going to validate the connection. Fingers crossed this works. Connected successfully. Click Save. And it's just going to validate that I can do it. If there's any dependencies missing up there, it's going to put those dependencies in. So everything's good. So it's got all the dependencies already installed up there. I'll hit Continue. And now it should be publishing. Now I didn't change any of the files locally, so it should just publish everything as it was, but when I added that new post, I really made a change to the database on the cover of that new article I added. So it should upload the change to the database, and then we'll be able to hit the site, and we should get it back. So it tells me what it's going to do, and then it goes off and starts doing the publishing. So this takes a couple of seconds while it does that.
Will that do two-way sync? If I make changes remotely? If you make changes directly on Azure, can you sync it back to your local?
Yes. So Web Matrix can connect to the remote site, whether it's Azure or anywhere, if it's Linux or Windows. If it's on a server, Web Matrix can connect to it, and it can pull the site locally, or it can let you make live edits to the site. But when it lets you make live edits to the remote site, it only lets you edit the files. Like if you want to change index.php like a file, it does not let you remotely edit the database.
But it will sync to the database. So
if you ask it to, yeah. If you tell it to pull it locally, it'll sync that there. And then you can make a change locally and sync it back up. But if you are...
I guess my scenario is, if I make content edits locally, and I make content edits remotely, will it sync?
Bi-directional instead of just pushing one direction for an update?
This version, but is there a merge?
I don't know if there's a merge. I think it's kind of like you'd have to manage it.
I don't think that would work because even Joomla itself doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, you have unique IPs, but if there was a clever way to get it out.
Yeah, I don't think it's managing that part of the merging process. That would really
There's really
get
no merge for two Joomla.
Yeah.
Sync instances, I don't care what platforms they're on.
Yeah, it's just physically moving the files and slinging them around.
Peter, so did I catch it right that Web Matrix can push up to a remote site that's not Windows Azure?
Absolutely, yeah. caught that right. This thing not loading.
That could be handy. Can it do remote to remote?
There we go. All right. So now, that's the Joomla site, but it is running at in the cloud there. So you guys can hit that URL on your laptops now. So we're at JDA NYC demo Azure websites.net. So this is running out of the US West Data Center, and there's the sample site. And if we browse to the Parks block, hopefully that post should be there when I push that. Yeah, there it is. So I made that edit locally, pushed it up a web matrix, and it's up there. So it's running in the cloud.
So can that sync remote to remote? So here's one of the things that I think is a missing feature in Joomla is that there's no staging workflow. So if I go and I edit an article in Joomla, boom, it's live. And there's some extensions that will create some workflow so you can draft it and stuff like that. But it's not, at least I'm not aware of any kind of a nice system so that you can have, development, testing, production type of staging process with data. If you can do it with files, that's usually not an issue. But it would be nice if you had a system where you could have your staging site where you're developing content and you push that to your production site. That's public. Which is basically what I'm seeing, but just instead of doing local to remote.
What I gather now, what happened here, I don't think there's any complexity. This is very simple in terms of the web matrix tool will pull and copy the database locally, whole hog. You make local changes, it will push it and overwrite whole hog on the server.
Yeah.
So that there's no, you're not getting any complex merging functionality.
This is not.
You're not going to do this in production.
The stage, you can't do that, because if somebody makes an article live in another place, well, you make a live.
Well, depends on if you control what.
Yeah, I would shut down the production server and say you're never editing on the production server. So all edits take place on that staging server and will get pushed to production. But which is kind of what this could do as long as you had it. And you're running it locally on your local host.
I'm running it local. I'm running it locally, and then I pushed it to the cloud as well. When I created the cloud, something happened that wasn't supposed to happen. I created a cloud account. I created an instance of Joomla in the cloud, but then for some reason it wasn't showing up. So I don't know if I missed a step or something. So there should have been a Joomla already running in the cloud that I'd filed in the cloud, never touching my machine, right? Then I stopped that process. I walked over. I created a local Joomla instance, just using the tool, and then I took my local instance and I pushed that to the cloud, and that showed up because I pushed it directly from the tool. But there's another instance of Joomla that I created when I first started the demo. I don't know where that is right now. I'm going to be troubleshooting that after I get off the stage up here and find out where it is. So I wanted to make sure I'm not doing smoke and mirrors here. But what I created locally and pushed, it's there. The local thing I created. But back to your question about the workflow, I don't know if there's anything that we would offer that would help with that specifically, other than saying you could create two instances in the cloud, like a staging and a production, do your edits on one, and then pull the staging down, push it up to production. It's sort of brute force at that point. There's no special magic, is what I'm trying to say. And there's also something to keep in consideration. With the cloud, you pay for bandwidth down. So if you go with this tool or another tool, select your database local, just pulls all that data and you pay for it. You don't pay anything when you push it up, but it's probably a small amount of data. And the database probably not that big, and you're not doing this that frequently. It's not like every user from every hit is doing that. That can be an issue there. So we're running out of time, so I just want to summarize things. So that's the gist of the tool, what it can do. So it can create the site locally for you, let you manage everything, publish it up, whether it's publishing to the cloud, Linux, Windows, or you give it a URL, it just goes there. And then the other thing which I was trying to show but didn't work fully was actually being in the portal and saying I want to file new Joomla site. And for some reason, this did not do what I expected it to do. It should have created the site, and I should have seen Joomla in the cloud without ever even touching Web Matrix on my computer. And any of you in the room should be able to log in and do this.
And did you say that Web Matrix 2 was creating a local instance of IIS Express, so it's running as like a user process as opposed to a service that the administrator needs rights to install? Or
That's correct. So when you install Web Matrix, that website is running under right here, so Joomla NYC local.
Yeah.
That's where it dropped all the files for that website. That's sent into my website, and that's the so this folder, that's my Joomla site. I can right-click, zip that folder, and that's my Joomla app. IIS Express has its settings and all its config files also in its own folder under my documents. So it's not on the machine, it's not specific to these are, if you're familiar with IIS, if you're not, you may not, but there's all these app host config, these are standard IIS config files. They all just sit here in this local directory. Now, if you wanted to run Joomla on full-fledged regular IIS as an admin, you could do that too. You wouldn't use the Web Matrix. You would use you would just use the Web Platform installer, which is the engine that Web Matrix uses under the covers. And you could say just install this in IIS. But then all that's doing is taking the Joomla files, installing all the dependencies, and putting it instead here. It's putting it under wherever his root folder would normally be on a Windows box. It's putting it under there somewhere in a central location on the machine.
So
This would be where
this is running on a SQL server.
MySQL.
MySQL.
It's running a MySQL server. Because I chose it when I set up. I could choose.
Oh, yes, okay.
Choose it, yeah.
Okay.
And I choose MySQL to keep it simple. You can choose.
I don't think of IIS using MySQL, but yes, it can.
Well, IIS doesn't use it.
Yeah.
Joomla uses it. IIS is just passing requests from the internet into the Joomla engine. Once it gets into Joomla, Joomla's doing its own thing under the covers. So that's what's going on there. So that's the gist there. Let me wrap by showing some humor.
So if you log off of your desktop as one user and log in as another user, you have a completely separate environment.
Yes,
So
you would.
if
It's
you have to
isolated from the user.
depersonalize something for a demo, you don't want to bring it. Wow. It's interesting.
So I always bring this up. I don't know how relevant this is. So I'd like to say a few words on Internet Explorer. So I know it's the most loved piece of software that Microsoft's ever made, right?
I mean, my life is easy for us.
Everyone loves it. And there's so much passion about Internet Explorer out there in the world. I took this picture at a Drupal camp about 2 years ago down in Atlanta. I was sitting behind this guy, and I was like, that just made me laugh. It was hysterical. It was at the time there was a lot of hysteria around IE6 must die and go away. And the funny thing is, everyone at Microsoft sort of feels the same way. We can't control it. We can't tell you to we can't force you to upgrade. There's legal reasons behind that and stuff. But unfortunately, the world is what it is. But that's really gotten better in the past 2 years. 2 years ago, this was a major pain point. Now I think we're down to like 0.2% that are actually still on IE6. It's very small. It's usually in the corporate community, people who are stuck on XP. So I just always say, do the world a favor and upgrade. And pretty soon, in about a month, we'll be ticking that box to 10. Because IE10 will be shipping with Windows 8. But things to know about that I still see, because folks just, the memory of how traumatic IE6 was to all of us as web developers sticks with us to the point where it's like, oh, there's IE9, well, who cares, I don't care about IE. I'm just gonna, maybe I develop on Mac, maybe I don't care about IE, right? I'm just gonna worry about Chrome, Safari, and all that stuff, and Firefox. And these aren't my words, I actually just, that's a quote I copied from someone who wrote this article. And I just, as the Microsoft guy, I kind of, because IE9 is really good compared to what was before it. It's got HTML5 and all that type of stuff. It's fast. It does hardware acceleration. So it's no longer where I have to say I'm embarrassed to use IE. It's awesome. So I just remind folks that don't thumb your nose at it or block it or not support it, because a lot of time, because the assumption is, oh, I have to do special work to my code to make it work in IE. But with IE9, pretty much it just works. And this was the link to the article that was in that tweet that I had, which is, this guy found an example of some site that actually put up, detected he was on IE, did enough work to do that, and said, we don't support Internet Explorer, and we're calling that a feature. Kind of like, haha in your face. And the truth was, he just went into IE, and IE can actually, you can manipulate the user agent string and switch it to something else, and the site loaded just fine. So the moral of the story is, you don't have to make code changes for IE anymore. It just works, pretty much, if you're developing to HTML standards and stuff. So I just want to remind folks that, because sometimes people forget that. The trauma from what was in IE6.
We're scarred.
Yeah, the scars stand. So even if you don't have IE, if you're on the Mac and literally all you're testing out is Firefox, Chrome, and Safari, just don't block IE. Especially IE9, most of it just works.
I don't hear much chatter about anybody blocking IE. I mean, we're all using third-party templates, and they've done this CSS shims for us, and now we're talking about going with Bootstrap possibly, and I'm sure they've got all the shims and the CSS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't come up much in meetings that anybody's having IE issues, other than maybe 6 yet, but nothing new.
Yeah, I mean that's the gist there. But it is. I still, especially here in New York, especially in the startup community, I see a lot of folks that just they're not. Some people are the way they are. It was scarring. It was a bad experience, right? So that's the talk. I'm going to answer any questions, but I think it's time for lunch, right?